What an incredible guest we have for you this time around. You really are in for a treat. Jamie Bartlett is an author, a journalist, and an all-round thought leader within the technology, digital, and journalistic space within technology and digital. We discuss what leadership means to Jamie. We discuss his formative years from growing up in a town in Kent through to doing a history degree in Oxford, right through to working for a think tank and getting into the technology space from there. We then dive into online extremism, societal shifts as a result of digital technology, and also how democracy and politics have changed following the evolution of digital technology, and lots of stuff around the periphery of that. We also discussed the brilliant Missing Cryptoqueen, which is an investigative documentary series that Jamie created along with his co-creator. It's on BBC Sounds. If you haven't listened to it, it is an absolute treat. This is just a magnificent conversation. He's a great guy, such a polished operator in front of the mic. It's Jamie Bartlett. Jamie, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders Podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks very much for having me.
I know you've been busy recently with the new episodes of the Missing Cryptoqueen. I listened to the latest episode recently, loved it, big fan. So look, we're a technology and leadership podcast, okay? Very direct question, Jamie. What does good leadership mean to you?
It's a difficult question for me because I don't usually have like big teams of people that I manage, although I'm on certain projects where I do have, I suppose people look up to me for some guidance and direction and stuff like that. So for me, in my kind of role, I try to lead by example, by which I mean, I try to work harder than everyone else. I try to make sure I do a lot of the crap jobs. I try to make sure I take the risks for the rest of the team. When you're like the presenter of a podcast, like the Missing Cryptoqueen, you've obviously got a lot of people behind the scenes doing the work for you that you can't do, really difficult stuff as well. So I try to make sure that I do my bit by fronting it, I have to take the reputational hit if it's rubbish. I get the praise if it's really good, but people will come after me personally if they don't like it. If any targeted threats will come after me. So I got to be like brave and confident and front all that. So you sort of find out what it is that people expect of you and your role, and you really lean into it and really do it well and not be panicking and worried. So you sort of got to have a bit of an air of calm and confidence. So that's the kind of things that I try to bring as a sort of a leader. But it's because of my job, it's a bit of a strange one. I'll tell you one thing, that the leader I always looked up to when I was maybe in a more conventional organization, I worked for a think tank, was this woman called Julia Margot, who was my boss. She was like the head of research. I'd be really nervous about something. I'd be thinking that it's going to be a damp squib, or the funder's going to be unhappy. And she would always say, I will deal with that. I'll take the rubbish. I'll take the complaints. I'll be the one who deals with the problems. You just focus on doing your bit. It really stuck with me how she would do that. And then you'd go over the trenches. You'd be in the trenches with her because you knew that she would always support you. And so I worked doubly hard. I always wanted to make sure she was happy. And the other thing that she did that I've taken as well is at 5:00 she'd be like, "See you later, everybody. I've got 3 kids. I don't care about this job as much as my kids, so I'm leaving. I'll deal with the rest tomorrow." And I was like, amazing. There's other things in her life that are more important than this job. Because when you're in your 20s as well, and I'm a long way from my 20s, you just think you got to work to get ahead. And she showed me as well that it's not just about that. You got to have other priorities in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a brilliant answer, actually. I mean, look, I think it's a broad question, and you could have answered that in the context of being a thought leader or in the context of being a line manager, which is kind of what you tilted towards. But look, I think you just defined leadership perfectly. I just think she obviously removed pressure from your shoulders so that you could be your creative best and your authentic self. And do you know what, Jamie? The one thing I love about your content is, and you've probably been told this before, is that I feel like when I'm listening to your content that you would be delivering that narrative exactly the same way if you and I were in a pub having a pint. And I think for that reason, is probably part of the reason you've had success in your career.
I have been told that before, but there's a couple of things about this. What the first is, I've always tried to write about technology or to talk about technology aimed at the general market, the general audience. And once you do that, and you remember 90% of people don't really know what you're talking about, and you really keep that in mind, it really helps you clarify your thinking as well and make things simple and basic. And it's well known that people want things in basic, simple things they can remember and cling on to. And I've always tried to do that. And I think that's part of where sort of my background's helped me to do that. And I've always thought that people do just prefer, when you start out in this business, you turn up and you try to be really professional and you play along with the rules of the game, and you're not really yourself. You sort of forget yourself because you're trying to be someone slightly different. You're trying to be the professional think tank researcher and serious journalist. And I've always found that when I go in there maybe a little bit unprepared and a little bit more like thinking on my feet, I've done better. But when you're delivering lines in like the Missing Cryptoqueen and other podcasts and TV things, it's so difficult because people always say, oh, just be yourself. Talk to me like we're chatting down the pub. So you actually do that. And then they say, no, not like that, though. That's too much. That's too...
Yeah.
Somewhere a bit more serious. And then you do a bit more authentic. And so you end up trying to find this kind of fake pseudo-authentic voice that's half you and half not you. And you know how hard it is to be natural on it's impossible. Yeah. There's a little art as well in how you do that. But I think sometimes, one of the tricks, okay, it's not a trick. People ask me a question when I'm giving a talk or on media or like I'm on the TV or something. And I just say, you know what? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, sure.
Next question. And everyone's like, oh my God.
Yeah, sure.
That's brilliant. They actually really like it when you say, I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Move on. I don't know. It's not my area, or I'm uncomfortable about it. I'm not sure. People like it. What they hate is when you churn out this meaningless answer.
Do you know what, right? There's a brilliant film. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Margin Call, and it's about the 2008 banking crisis. There's a brilliant scene in it, okay, which I think is the best cinematic example of leadership in a modern context. You could argue like Spartacus is more leadership orientated, but in terms of modern boardroom leadership, there's a brilliant scene when basically the bank they've just realized they've lost more money than the entire capitalization of the bank, and there's turmoil in the markets, and they have this really big emergency meeting in this fictional bank, which is based on like a Lehman Brothers or something, I think, or Goldman Sachs. But basically the CEO comes in on his helicopter and all the board are all sitting in the boardroom and they're waiting for the CEO to come in, who's clearly got a charismatic individual. But he's played by Jeremy Irons, basically. And there's this moment when he walks into the boardroom to find out what the hell is going on and why he's been woken up in the middle of the night sort of thing. And he just sits down and he says, right, can somebody tell me what's going on, but explain it to me like I'm a child? Because it's certainly not brains that got me to this position. And I just thought that is what leadership is, isn't it? It's just having the confidence to not give any bullshit. I'm the smartest person in the room. Tell me like I'm a child, and let's have a simple conversation of what the problem is and how we can get it done. And I just thought that was and Jeremy Irons is just brilliant, isn't he?
It's a really good point, because especially with modern technology, and we're talking about technology and leadership, again, when I was a bit younger, I would be embarrassed to ask things that I felt like I should have known. So I didn't want to ask, like, what do you really mean by that? I don't get that. And as I've got older, I used to think other people who did it to me, I was a bit like, oh, well, you should know this. And as I've got older, I've sort of come to value the people that actually do that will just say, maybe I am an idiot, but please, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please explain this to me properly, or explain it again, or explain it simpler?
Yeah.
And I've come to see that takes a confidence and a bravery, because if you've been around for a long time, you know that people won't think you're stupid for asking that. I did a research paper once with a guy called Sir David Omand. He was the Director General for GCHQ. And I was writing a joint paper with me, who was 27, and a colleague who was 22, and him about social media and intelligence work. And what I just realized is that when we said something and we were thinking, me and my colleague were thinking, I mean, he knows everything. He knows 1,000 times more than me. He would actually sit like this and he'd listen with his eyes closed. He'd really listen. We'd be explaining something. And me and Carl, my mate, were thinking like, is he thinking what a pair of idiots we are?
Yeah.
And then he'd say like, sorry, I don't understand that. Could you please explain it again? And but he'd really take on board. He wanted to learn from us.
Sure.
He felt like there were things he could learn, and he wasn't too afraid to say, I don't know. And he was the guy who ran GCHQ. And I thought, oh my God, that is what, like,
that's probably why he got there, though, isn't it? That
willing
level
to learn from other people and not
sure.
feel stupid and ask stupid questions.
Because as you get more experienced, it kind of gets harder for you to admit that you don't understand something, and you risk looking stupid. You know what I mean? Even more, because there's more to lose when you're I don't know, as a CEO or whatever it is. But anyway, look, let's talk about your career then. I want to talk about your formative years. Well, let me ask you this one, Jamie. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I suppose it depends how young. I mean, I did want to work in a sweet shop, or I mean, so
be a pirate.
Yeah, the thing is, actually, like, I went to a school where going to university is not considered to be like everyone goes. It wasn't like that. My family hadn't been to university. My brother hasn't been. My sister hasn't been. So we weren't a family of sort of academic-y people who wanted to go to university. It wasn't considered the normal thing to do. And I know now from having friends where that is the normal thing to do, where their parents went to university, it's a very different mindset. So I actually, when I finished my A-levels, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Just wanted to maybe get out of Chatham, Kent, where I grew up. But I went to work at a supermarket, and they were trying to get me on the training program to be like fast track to be a manager at Safeways, because I was always someone who. I'm very, very competitive. Like, I wanted to stack the shelves faster than everybody else. So I'd work so hard to be the best shelf stacker. I just wanted to beat everyone at things like that. Like, just from playing sport, and my dad was so competitive as well. I wanted to beat him, and I wanted to beat everyone, and I wanted to be a really good shelf stacker. So I was brilliant at it. And they wanted to put me on the training program. It was a toss of a coin. I didn't know whether to do that, or maybe I could get into university because I got good A-levels. Not because I loved studying, but because I wanted to beat everybody at their A-levels.
Sure, yeah.
But then I decided after a year, like, I've got to do something. And I studied history because I didn't know what else to study.
You didn't just go to university, though, Jamie, did you? You went to Oxford, which is incredible.
I didn't go straight to Oxford. I went to Southampton University to study history.
Right.
And I didn't know what to do. I was just studying. And I was one of those people that went there because I didn't know what else to do. And I wanted to get out of my town. Gave me 3 years to figure it out, try and come up with something. By the end of the 3 years, I'd also studied hard and got the best grades in the whole year. So I got a scholarship to Oxford, and I didn't know what to do still. And I was like, well, I might as well do this because they're going to give me a scholarship. I'll study history again. But I didn't want to do history. I just didn't know what else I wanted to do. And my thinking, looking back on it, I've always thought what I was able to do, I think in the back of my mind, was to keep as many doors open as possible, just to keep options open. And I did that master's degree, and I still didn't know. So I did another master's degree that I paid for on a credit card because I'm an idiot. Wow. But I was so desperate to come up with something.
Yeah.
And I just kept keeping these doors open for myself, trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
Sure.
And then after my second master's degree, I worked briefly in international development, and I didn't like it at all. I started having these visions of being a diplomat or something, and I was like, I got a degree. This is how I'm so naive. I was walking around thinking, I've got a degree from Oxford University. I'll be able to walk into any job because I came from somewhere where no one had a degree from Oxford.
Yeah, sure.
No one. I think I was either the first or second person in my whole school that had ever gone to Oxford or Cambridge, and I fell into think tank work as a researcher, and I just really enjoyed it. And that was when I was 27 or something like that.
Yeah.
27. And that's what just kept, like,
sure.
The trajectory was
you in that direction then, yeah.
Journalism, research, like internet subcultures, and I just kept going down in that direction. I've been doing that for ever since.
Where did journalism and technology come from?
It was more getting into technology as an area of research, because my master's degree was actually in historical research methods. So I was quite into the methodology of doing research. So I was like, that's a
Okay.
thing. I've got a bit of an expertise in doing research. I enjoyed getting out there and interviewing people and hanging around with people and seeing how people interacted and so on. And then the funny thing is, I was really interested in radical political movements, and I started getting interested in the English Defence League. And you remember the sort of football hooligan far right street protest thing. And I sort of felt like I could understand them a little bit, because where they came from was not that dissimilar to where I'd come from in a strange way. I could people in the EDL, I sort of saw my friends almost and it wasn't that I was sympathetic to what they were arguing, but I felt like I could understand those people. I could speak to those people without thinking this is like impossible to do. I wouldn't be nervous to go on an EDL march and interview people and go to the pub with them afterwards, because it's not actually that dissimilar in some ways to where I'm from. So I thought, I think I can go and understand these groups, because I feel like with radical political movements, if you basically want to not allow them to become massive, you want to counter argue. You can't just dismiss them. You've got to understand where they come from and why their arguments could resonate with people. And if you just say, I'm not interested, you're all a bunch of idiots, you're never going to truly defeat an idea that way. So
absolutely.
Anyway, so I get in, so I sort of start looking into the English Defence League quite a lot. And I suddenly realised that the English Defence League, everyone is calling a street-based protest movement, but actually it is a Facebook group with a small militant wing that protests on the streets. Right. And everyone's looking at this group the wrong way. So then I have this idea with a colleague of mine at Demos. I was like, how can we get to the Facebook groups? How can we understand them? And we had this idea of doing targeted Facebook adverts at members of the English Defence League. So rather than selling them jeans or T-shirts or concert tickets, we are going to target every member of the English Defence League with an advert on Facebook, asking them to fill in an online survey about their attitudes and beliefs. Right, so I set it all up on Facebook. Like, I'm running an advert and I'm targeting members of the EDL, 1/10 of a penny per impression or whatever it is. At the time, 2009 it was, I think.
They were actually effective in those days, weren't they? Very effective.
£100 in the budget. I think it was probably like of my own money. And I come back on Monday and I've got like 1,000 responses from members of the EDL. Yeah. My first thought was, this is amazing new way to target people using the internet to do research, like in proper, like you can target people and talk to people and understand people and get responses and data about social phenomenon in a way that is totally new. One, that's amazingly interesting. I love to find my area, and I thought this could be it. Internet research, like figuring out how you get to people online and study them properly. But then I realized, as a researcher that I was, because I had this background in research methods, there's no methodology. How do I know these people aren't lying to me? How can I design the targeting so I really get a good reflection of EDL members? If I start scraping data from Twitter, how do I know it's a representative sample of the people I want to get to? And I suddenly realized there's a whole new world of research method in internet-based research. So I suddenly felt like I'd found my niche. By 2011, I'd set up a research center that was a combination of machine learning, big data, AI, machine learning, natural language processing from the University of Sussex, in collaboration with Demos, the think tank, where we had the more social science background, to create essentially a social media research hub that specialized in doing rigorous social media research. And back then, 2011, I suppose, it was one of the first places that had ever done that. And the idea was, there's millions of data points out there. There's amazing new ways of scraping data, analyzing data. The commercial and advertising sector have been doing this for a while now. The research sector, who can get amazing insights in social trends and understand the effect of technology on attitudes and political movements and beliefs. We are miles behind the commercial sector.
Yeah, sure.
So this center is going to create new methodologies, new techniques, big data techniques using social science to sample properly and to present research properly or in an accessible way. It was such a big, new, exciting area. And that's where it all started for me. And I think that I sort of take the lesson there that there's so many exciting areas that, frankly, one of the reasons I did it is because I also knew that the bosses, the journalists, the big companies, the big political pollsters, the political parties, they didn't have a clue what was going on.
No.
When I turn up and say, I've started a social media research center using NLP and machine learning, and they're like, tell us what you know. We're like, you're the guy. We trust you.
You were ahead of your time, though, in that respect. I think ultimately, in a simple level, Jamie, you saw the value in data before most other people did. Really, I suppose, in your space, maybe.
What do they say? Like, if you're one step ahead of the curve, people think you're pioneering. But if you're 2 steps ahead, they think you're crazy or evil. I was only 1 step ahead, and I was only 1 step ahead within my little world because there were lots of other, like in the commercial space and intelligence agencies and stuff, they were doing a lot of this already.
Yeah, sure.
It's just in my area, it wasn't really being done.
No.
I've always found as well that it's one thing being able to have the idea. Often you are a little bit too early with it. You've got to work out, you can have the idea, but you've got to work out what's the practical application of using machine learning to analyze tweets. How can are companies ready to really pay money to have that? Is it of great value to them? Do they understand the value proposition that you bring to them with this stuff? And I think I was quite good at being an early person, seeing the where this was going and what we could do. But I wasn't so good at knowing how to then take that and turn it into a really big, viable business opportunity or because other people then 5 years after me started creating gigantic, successful businesses doing this, and I'd already moved on.
Yeah, sure.
And I wasn't so good at the execution of it.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I did a history degree, and I didn't realize how valuable the skills I was getting were going to become, if that makes sense. Like, I still thought I was learning about the Magna Carta, but I was actually learning about analyzing sources, and that's something that helped me and I benefited from later in my career. It sounds like that you did as well, which is really interesting. One thing I am interested in, though, is that you did a brilliant TED talk, and you've obviously written a book on it as well about the internet killing democracy. So the question is, Jamie, do you still think the internet is killing democracy, or have you changed your view on that at all?
Well, my argument in that book, it was called The People versus Tech, that one. It was that not exactly that the internet was killing democracy. I know that was sort of the subtitle.
Yeah.
So, it was more that...
I knew you wasn't explicitly saying it like that. I'm trying to provoke you, Jamie. Come on.
Yeah. I'll tell you the other. Modern digital technology, the way it's constructed, the way the business model works, the basics of how information moves around the world is undermining and ultimately will destroy modern representative democracies. The two systems are completely out of sync with each other. There may be a new form of democracy that comes along that works with digital technologies, but representative democracies, as we have constructed them, and digital technologies as we use them and they use us, those two things are incompatible. So yeah, I do still believe that, yeah.
So what do you think about sort of the way that elections are getting influenced by things like social media campaigns and stuff? Like, what in your findings, do you think that is something that is just life and we've always tried to influence campaigns through marketing, whether it was pre-digital or whatever? Or do you think it's gone a bit far? We all saw the documentary with Cambridge Analytica and stuff like that. Is this just the way the world is now, Jamie? Or is it something that, we need to keep an eye on and regulate a bit more?
I did a BBC series about this as well. Secrets of Silicon Valley, it was called, where I interviewed Alexander Nix from Cambridge Analytica. And so I know the Cambridge Analytica story quite well. I mean, so they're using micro-targeted Facebook adverts in the Trump campaign in 2016. And they claim to be using something called psychographics, which is creating profiles on millions of people about their basic sort of fundamental psychological makeup using a standardized psychological survey called OCEAN, which stands for, basically gives every single person a score on 5 personality domains: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, another one that I've forgotten, and neuroticism. The idea was that they were creating a model that could predict everyone's personality type across those 5 domains using purely Facebook likes, and then design adverts that were tailored to each personality type. And frankly, pretty much snake oil. Like, I don't believe they actually built a proper model that could do that. However, think about the ongoing increase in data that we produce about ourselves, the ever improving speed of computing power, whether or not in 20 years' time that actually will be quite possible. And actually, in 20 years' time, elections will be run based on 50 years of collecting data about you, about your diet, your travel patterns, your mood, as well as all the other things to do with your social posts and your purchasing behavior, and way more data than we have now about each of us, and analyzed by machines way smarter than they are now. Each person will be receiving a perfectly tailored, dynamic, individualized, micro-targeted advert that might change frequently depending on the time of day, that tries to nudge them in a particular direction. Now, that sounds ridiculous, maybe, but I don't think it's any more ridiculous than when you think about, imagine trying to explain Cambridge Analytica and Facebook elections in 2005 to someone, and yet here it is. So I believe that the direction of travel that the Cambridge Analytica, that's the real thing about Cambridge Analytica, what it portends to, like where we're actually heading. And I don't think the rules we have at the moment are enough to make people trust in the process in an election when you're living in a world with smart machines firing a million ads at a million different people that's dynamic and changeable. Everyone will just accuse everyone of cheating. No one will believe the results. People will say that everyone's being manipulated. If you don't agree with the results, you'll say it's because the other side were using this sophisticated model, and the legitimacy of elections is undermined. And that's what I think we should be worried about. So I think we need to seriously revisit how elections are run and how they're regulated. How about this? Every single election advert that's run on any social media platform should be published. Everyone should see what everybody else gets to see. That will be millions of different posts, but we can then use machine learning to analyze differences and discrepancies or lies or whatever it is. Because at the moment, the problem is no one really knows what everyone else is seeing. This is why it can fuel such conspiracism and stuff like that. So,
yeah, and that's the thing, is there's so much conspiracy out there right now. Populism seems to be on the rise. Extreme opinions just seem to be exploding. I mean, you talked about Majid Nawaz. I mean, this is everywhere, though, Jamie. This is getting worse, isn't it? How do we stop this? How do we rein this in and regulate it so we've got some consensus, or we've got some sort of control over crazy ideas? You know, I'm talking like Alex Jones was in the news recently about, obviously, for some of the awful stuff he did with Sandy Hook.
You're always going to have people that believe that, and I don't think you can regulate it away or wish it away or just think, oh, if only everyone would be smart like me. Because there's plenty of evidence as well that very intelligent people are just as good at deluding themselves into believing falsehoods and conspiracies. So the idea that silly people out there believe stuff and we need to get them to think like I do is
it's not like that, is it?
Not like that, is it? Exactly.
And we have to recognize that some of them are actually true. Okay?
Exactly.
I remember hearing a conspiracy about Jimmy Savile, okay, and the other things around the periphery of that. It was an outright conspiracy. I remember hearing it not that long ago, and everyone was saying it was an idiotic thing to think.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Look where that ended up. So it's a minefield, isn't it?
Everyone always just says education and says, "Oh, we got to educate people better," but we can go beyond that and say, what are the specific skills and techniques and attributes and philosophies that would allow people to better navigate the information hellscape that we all now live in? And it's not just to say we're going to teach people to be smart like me. So what should we encourage people to learn, and how, where we can still have very, very tough debates. We can still respect there are people with fundamentally different opinions to us. We don't want to silence them, but we want to make sure that people can navigate this informational world far better. And I don't think we're there yet with media literacy. But for me, media literacy is the number one thing you can learn, because you are now, when you come out of school now, and this isn't just for kids, I would wish it on everyone, but the kids are the only ones we can get to. We have the world's information at our fingertips. School used to be about teaching you things that you would then take into life. You'd learn the things there, but really what school is now is learning how to learn, because you go out into the world and all the world's information is at your fingertips. You've got to learn how to navigate it properly. And that's the most important skill of all. And media literacy sometimes gets 1 hour in a kind of whatever the lesson it actually falls under is. It's not given anywhere near enough resource or priority. It's also things like human psychology. I don't think we study well enough the basic human flaws in our own way of thinking, our own cognitive biases that lead us to want to believe things we read on the internet that conform with our existing views. So when you teach media literacy, you've got to look at like the anchoring effect, how design can trick you on a website, cognitive bias, the general human tendency to flock together with people that are like you, and how you can fight that. These are basic human cognitive weaknesses, really, that we should be learning. We should be teaching those things.
Yeah, but I think that the algorithm needs to potentially be managed, though, because you know as well as I do, Jamie, let's say, if I like a post on YouTube, I like a video on YouTube, and I run a search on YouTube to do with fishing, you can bet your bottom dollar the next time I log in, it'll be all fishing videos. But supposing if I'm doing about making bombs for, obviously questionable reasons, then I'll be getting stuff like that as well. So it's kind of filter bubble effect, isn't it?
But rather than trying to regulate the algorithm, which I agree there's definitely some value in doing that, the recommendation engine is feeding you, pushing you to things that it thinks you like based on what you've already done. So you could also teach people about how that works, but why we are susceptible to it.
Sure.
So you will want to start surrounding yourself with fishing videos or far right videos once you've watched 3, and then you'll watch another 5. And the recommendation engine you'll be confirming to the recommendation engine, this is indeed what I like. But you've got to psychologically, you've got to realize the process, the journey that you are on.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah. That's a good point. On a more positive note, then, you do a lot of research on the tech space, technology innovation. What are you most excited about, Jamie?
Well, as you can guess already, I'm quite pessimist generally about technology. Unfortunately, I'm most optimistic, however, about demographic change. So I'm always complaining that the police, they're miles behind, online fraud, totally clueless, don't know what's going on, can't police the darknet properly. They're so far off it, they're so old-fashioned. But already, like, generation has kind of come through since I started this work. So we're talking about 25-year-olds now in the police who come in as brand new recruits to be bobbies on the beat. Many of them have got amazing skill sets. Like, they'll be incredible online researchers. They'll be fantastic at understanding internet subcultures, because some of them set up a subreddit once. And you got this amazing demographic of teachers and local authority workers and police officers and whoever it is who will have an amazing abundance of technology know-how and skill. If the people at the top who still find this all very confusing are able to realize that in their organization, some of the younger guys coming through have got amazing skills that can help them, and just look beyond their exact qualifications, because some of these people will have learned how to manipulate 4chan and do a bit of coding, and they might be amazing at data analysis or data visualization, but they don't have it on their CV as a qualification because they learnt it when they were playing online games. You've got an amazing skill set. And I do feel like in the UK, compared to a lot of other countries, and I might be wrong about this, we are often more willing to promote young people who are capable rather than just, it's now your turn. You've worked here for 20 years. You can now get the promotion. So our work culture sets us up quite well as a place to recognize new talents in technology from the younger generation coming through. So I'm always like to police when I speak to police officers and they complain about not having the skilled staff sometimes to do the online research. I'm like, that's because you're not looking in the right places. I bet you've got 1,000 of those people who you currently got walking up and down the streets, but you don't even realize how good they might be at something else. It's demographic change that I'm optimistic about. And it's the same with teaching. That's what makes me optimistic.
There was a conversation on Twitter before about this hiring like a line manager who hired some sort of technologist or marketing person purely off the back of the fact that on the CV, on the resume, I think they called it, under interests, the first interest was Googling.
Yeah,
but it turns out that person was like a literal ninja when it comes to research.
What a
it's
skill.
Incredible. But it's like having it's an external brain, isn't it?
I think that's exactly it. It's a really good example of that. And when I speak to a lot of younger people, as many of us are, we're always pleasantly surprised by how thoughtful they are about technology, how aware they are of its problems, how critical they are. Yeah, I know they've got some different behaviors to maybe what I have, but their sort of way of approaching it and thinking about it is not something I worry about anymore, because I can see so much thought goes into it. So yeah, I guess it's that the generation, I've got more confidence in the next generation than I thought I would, and it's there that I have my confidence rather than technology that I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you for that, Jamie. So I want to talk about the Missing Cryptoqueen, obviously, a big fan. How did you come across this story? Where did it come from? And how did you get involved in this journey that you went on?
Well, I did this TED talk about buying drugs on the dark net back in like 2015 or something. And I get an email from this BBC journalist in late 2018 called Georgia Catt. She's a producer, podcast producer, radio producer. And she says, I've seen your TED talk about Bitcoin. Well, I've found this other story. I was at dinner recently, and a friend of mine actually pitched me this new thing that he said was going to be the next Bitcoin. And it's called OneCoin. And he pitched it to me because he wanted me to invest. And then I looked into it, and it looks completely crazy. It's like this woman's on the run. She's disappeared. No one knows where she is. Everyone seems to be getting really rich from it, but no one's able to actually get the money out. And I think this could be a really good story for the BBC. What do you think? So we started looking into it a little bit, and it just got weirder and weirder and weirder. And the truth is that I think the BBC at the time really wanted a story about cryptocurrency because it was getting bigger and bigger, and more people were investing and didn't really understand what they were putting their money into. But they wanted it to be exciting. They wanted it to be dramatic. They wanted it to like a true crime story, because a lot of crypto podcasts, they apologies to anyone who does one or listens to one, they can be a bit boring and they can be a bit technical. It's all about, let's talk about hash rates. Let's talk about the Ethereum fork. Let's talk about the burn rate of certain coins. And it's really like, even for me, I don't understand half of it. So they were thinking, how do we reach a big audience with a story about crypto?
Yeah.
And I think when they saw the story of OneCoin and a missing woman, and we're going to try and find the woman, and through the medium, through the kind of vehicle of looking for this missing person, we'll explain blockchain, we'll explain money laundering, we'll explain multi-level marketing, we'll explain all these other bits of the story. And it will be exciting because people will want to know what happened to the woman. But secretly, we're also telling them about all these other bits. That's how it all started. And we never thought it was going to end up where we are now, like 4 years later, still on it. She's now on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
Yeah, I heard that.
It's become a global story.
I'm assuming you bringing attention to this story, did it help the FBI's endeavors at all?
So I can say that I've interviewed the FBI. They never really give much away whether we help or hinder. There's an argument that us bringing global attention helped. It's encouraged people to come forward. It's raised awareness about the scam. But also it may have given away clues about her whereabouts that have made their life more difficult. they wouldn't ever say, obviously, and we're doing our job, they're doing their job, and we have very different priorities. So I couldn't, I don't really know. I don't really know whether it's helped or hindered. I hope it's helped. One thing it's definitely helped is raise awareness about these kinds of scams. So it's hopefully helping a lot of people who didn't invest in the next OneCoin, who listened to the podcast and realized, I'm going to keep my money. I'm not going to put money in this. That was the idea, really.
Yeah. The most heartbreaking part of it for me was when you went to Africa and you were talking to those people who'd literally put everything into it and they thought they were going to get their money back still. And that was just really sad.
I think the people who push Bitcoin, who say Bitcoin's always going to go up, Bitcoin is the future reserve currency, Bitcoin is going to be used by everyone for everything, it's the digital gold, the price constantly increases, it's magical and all this. That level of hype and certainty is had the unintended but very unfortunate consequence of a lot of people in other countries who couldn't afford to invest a lot of money but invested everything they could in the next Bitcoin, thinking they were also going to get rich.
Yeah, sure.
It was a side effect, an unfortunate side effect of all the hype.
Yeah.
Was that people thought, I've missed Bitcoin, I'm not going to miss out on the next one. It always goes up. It's the future of money. And the OneCoin scammers understood that. And that's why it was so successful.
Sure. They rode off the crest of the Bitcoin wave, didn't they? That's why I was going to events in 2016, and I have been since.
You're a Bitcoiner.
I'm a big Bitcoin fan, you know. I'm a maxi, though. I am really skeptical about every other coin.
Do you have the little red eyes on your Twitter profile?
Yeah. A couple of questions to wrap up then. Jamie, outside of work, I think you're a bit of a workaholic, aren't you? But what do you do outside of work? What are you interested in?
It used to be a lot of things. Lately, it's been just trying to relax, not doing very much, watching films and reading and not. I used to be really loved my sport, loved football, loved all that sort of thing. Picked up a few injuries. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, I nothing to speak of other than just trying to relax, because the thing is about doing deep investigative journalism like the OneCoin story, and I'm working on a couple of others at the moment as well, is it becomes quite all-consuming. You become obsessed with a story.
Yeah.
You're worried all the time. You're nervous. Sometimes you get very paranoid. You think you're being followed. And it's really important to try to wind down properly.
Sure.
And I used to be like, work all hours of the day, work until the night, and then go to bed, get up, start working. And I've learned the value of just trying to no, I'm going to now just sit down and watch 2 hours of The Sopranos. And that is quality time. That's not wasted time. That is time I need to reset. And
you've got margin call now as well. You can add to it.
Margin call. I'll put that one on the list. Yeah.
What advice would you give to your 21-year-old self? That guy who didn't know what he wanted to do. What would you say to that guy?
I think it's probably that most people don't actually know what they're doing. And most people in most industries are bluffing. They're nervous.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't fully understand. They're not as confident as they think they are. You won't realize that, 21-year-old, until you're about 35, by which time you've missed maybe the chance to do stuff as well. So people aren't as confident as you think they are. They're bluffing and they're just as nervous and worried as you. And I've got older and older and got more and more senior in places. And I see and I realize people are still bluffing and they're still faking and they're still pretending and they still don't know what they're doing. And they're still relying on other people to figure things out. And they still hope someone else is in charge above them to fix everything. So if you can find a niche where you are really confident in what you do, like I tried to do with this social media research, you should be confident. You will know more than the person above you, and they will quickly realize that, and they'll come to depend on you. Like when I used to go, it was very hard to get into this industry, and basically all I tried to do is get a little opportunity and then make myself indispensable to the person above me by learning something, knowing something, making them need me. So they couldn't fire me, they couldn't get rid of me. And so there's that. And it's also that Don't worry if at 21 you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're planning. Don't think I've got to figure it out by 23 or by 25 and tie yourself down because I didn't really know what I wanted to do until I was 35. I was still fishing around, trying to figure it out. Finally, like I said, finally finding my thing by probably 32, 33, finally figuring out the thing I could do that I really enjoyed and that I was good at. And I was freaking out at 25. Like, what am I going to do? I don't know. I should have, I can't enjoy myself. I can't relax. I can't go and maybe travel somewhere because I've got to get on the career ladder. And I feel like I missed things that I should have done. So don't panic, because if you're 21 now, you're probably going to live to about 140, by which time the retirement age is going to be 110. So don't freak out that you've got to figure it out by 30.
Isn't it hilarious when you're like, I look back when I was 18 or 21 and I thought like 25 or 30 was old. Now I'm 42. I'm like, bloody hell, if I was old then, I'm ancient now.
Yeah, but you know what the thing is? I felt old at 27. I think I felt older at 27 in some ways than I do now. Because I felt like, oh my God, I've got to do this. I've got to have that done. I've got to... So it sounded old when I was 18. And then when I got there, I thought I was old. I thought I was so old. Oh my God,
past it
already. And it's only when you're a bit older you realise, why are you worried? You got time to figure it out. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Completely agree. Last one then. Book recommendation. I always ask every guest, you got a book? Are you much of a reader? If you're not, maybe a documentary or something.
When I read books about technology or try to think about technological trends and what's coming and what matters, I very rarely get inspiration from books about technology.
Yeah.
I get inspiration from history books on the origins of totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Gave me more ideas about where technology was heading.
Yeah, sure.
Than any technology book I've ever read. So it wouldn't necessarily be a specific recommendation, but if you're interested in learning about tech and thinking about tech and its trajectories, technology books aren't always the ones to read. History books are probably better. And I know that we say that as history graduates, so we're biased. But the further back you look, the further ahead you can see.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true for technology, because technology in the end is going to come down to its applications by humans. And human behavior is quite predictable, and you can see trends and examples of mass hysteria and tendencies towards falling in line for the big strong man who's going to rescue us, and all these things, and how power really works in society. And books like that will give you ideas about technology. It won't be the books about tech.
That's a really good point. I love that.
You would say that because you're a history graduate.
No, I just think anything on human endeavor and things like totalitarianism or whatever, because ultimately humans will make the technology to shape their agenda, won't they? And I think Michael Saylor talks about this, how we think about tech and tech disruption as being something and a phenomenon that only exists in the last 20 years. But it's always happened, isn't it? You know, like the printing press was a massive technological advance, you know, the Industrial Revolution and so on and so forth. So, yeah. So, Jamie, where can people find you and what are you up to at the moment?
Yeah, Twitter's probably the best place. I'm at Jamie J. Bartlett. And, well, the most recent thing I've done, actually, is the Missing Cryptoqueen podcast is now also a book. So I spent the last 2 years turning it into a book. It's very different from the podcast, a lot more detailed, a lot more twists and turns to the story. But the Missing Cryptoqueen book is now out. So that's probably the best place to get the latest.
Fantastic. And I can certainly back up the listening to the podcast. But yeah, I'll have to check out the book. I'm assuming there's extra content, some bits and bobs that we didn't get in the podcast then, yeah?
I mean, the podcast is probably only about 15% of the story, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
It's so much bigger. Yeah, there's so much more going on. Yeah. Just the way podcast audio material and written word is very different in what level of detail you can go into. If I started going into the detail in the podcast that I go into the book, you'd have switched off by the end of episode 1.
Look, Jamie, thank you so much. I've loved talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thanks very much for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed that. I have to say, it was a little bit daunting interviewing a polished journalist like Jamie, but he was brilliant, and it ended up being quite an easy interview because he was just so natural talking on the microphone. So there's so much to choose from in terms of takeaways and highlights, but the first thing I think that stood out for me was the way he brilliantly described leadership and what it means to him, bearing in mind he's not someone who's gone down the sort of traditional corporate route. He is nonetheless a thought leader in his field, but his career has been is a little bit unconventional. But I loved it the way he talked about his old boss at the think tank that he worked at, which was such a formative period for Jamie, quite clearly. And he basically just talked about how she lifted the burden of pressure from him and his colleagues' shoulders so that they could be their creative best, which I thought is just an anecdote which sums up leadership quite brilliantly. Another interesting point was Jamie's optimism in relation to Gen Z and their perspective on the role of technology in shaping a better future. Like him, I was quite skeptical of how the digital native generation was going to turn out with all this incredible capability and technology at their fingertips. So it was quite refreshing to hear Jamie's optimism on this point. I think, from someone who lives and breathes this space, I think that's quite reassuring that he is optimistic. Jamie's a great guy. I highly recommend his content, especially The Missing Cryptoqueen, but he's released 4 books. I've not read any of them, but I've just listened to his content. But I will definitely be reading The Missing Cryptoqueen book, as it contains a lot more content on this investigation. Great guy. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing it. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for downloading this episode. We really love doing this show and are absolutely humbled by all of the incredible people who download and listen, plus the incredible guests who take the time to come on and share their secrets and experiences with our listeners. Please can I ask that you take a couple of seconds to subscribe or follow the show. This small action means a lot to us and helps us greatly. Thank you. As you quite possibly have heard me mentioning in the past, we record the mass majority of our episodes at an amazing studio facility here in Cardiff at Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and scaling businesses geared towards supporting growth in tech, digital and creative industries across an ever-increasing collection of locations and partner locations, UK-wide and internationally. It really is the perfect place for your business to start up, scale up, accelerate, or innovate. Head over to tramshedtech.co.uk or just search Tramshed Tech on your favourite social media platform.